Welcome to our broadcast for today, and my name is Alexander Red. I'm your host here. And of course, critical race theory, CRT as it is known, it is a developed concept by scholars to teach race and justice through the lens of American history. Now, this theory, developed in the late 1970s, aims to promote equity, that is, outcome, and equality, equal treatment of all people, and the revisitation of American history on racial justice. Now, some CRT content is now restricted in primary education in about 21 states or over 21 states. Now, the questions remain. Why is it that Americans are so divided on this theory? Why is it that some U.S. politicians and prominent faith leaders are vehemently opposed to the idea of critical race theory, which is known as CRT? And that is a question, or those are the questions that we will be looking at today. And we'd like to say welcome to the Gracious Hopes live podcast. And this is a platform that teaches and discusses contemporary issues confronting the Christian life of faith in Christ. My name is Alexander Red, your host here. And of course, as always, the co host, Reverend Swat Dede, is here as well. Reverend Dede, welcome to the
Thank you,
program.
brother. Welcome. It's a blessed day. This is the day the Lord has made us always, and we're going to rejoice and be glad in it because in every situation we should be grateful that we are still alive. So we are glad to come back today to discuss this critical issue, critical race theory. People have different interpretations. People have different perception of it. So we will try today to discuss it the best way we can. We might not give you all the answers you need or want, but we try to just discuss the issue and then throw it out there to you to continue the discussion where you are. So I'm glad to be here today, and brother, we look forward to this discussion.
Yes, we look forward to it, and we encourage you, the viewer. Please make your comments. Anything you got to say about it, please do so, because we'll be pretty much providing the meaning of critical race theory, and we know it is a much broader concept in the sense that it has broad division among Americans in the school system, in politics, and even in the church. And so we'll be looking at not just us, but we'll look at some other materials that will enlighten us or open our eyes more on what it means to experience or to learn about critical race theory. And we'll start off the program here this afternoon with our first clip here. And this is defining critical race theory. And like I said, this has brought division among Americans, scholars who developed the concept and in the late 70s and later on, starting from the George Floyd's case, it escalated to a point where racism is thrown in the forefront. And so CRT, critical race theory, has become a catchword or words that people use for so many other things. And the idea is that some people just don't want CRT taught in the schools, particularly primary schools. And so it is a conflict going on. So let me bring up this first video clip here that we will be looking at today. And that will, of course, give us an idea, every one of us an idea of what it means to know much about uh, CRT. Let me get my technical stuff here together. Let me see here. Oh, okay, there you go. Okay, I think that's the wrong one here. Let's see. Well, we'll be right back here quickly as I sort out something here for our first video clip. Let's see. It'll be just a moment here. Okay. Okay, so let us bring this clip here first and play uh, the definition of CRT. And this was is a production of PBL Washington Post. Let's see here. Let's get situated here. Okay.
Purpose of critical race theory is to provide Americans with a way to understand the legacy of racism, even though those stories sometimes hurt.
It's anti-American training that vilifies white people and demands they apologize.
The best learning for students about social studies and about our democracy and our country is the learning where students can really grapple with the issues and really come to a deeper understanding of how our past informs our present.
All of this revisionist, woke curriculum, you are not going to do this to our children.
Teachers across the country are caught in the middle of the latest flashpoint in America's cultural war, critical race theory. So what exactly is it? And why is there a push to ban it in schools?
Critical race theory is a body of ideas and a set of approaches to understanding history and the present of American society that looks at the ways in which racial unfairness have been woven into the fabric of our institutions.
In other words, critical race theory, or CRT for short, is a legal academic framework centered on the idea that racism is systemic. It first started to coalesce in the 1970s, when Black, Hispanic, and Asian legal scholars were researching the persistence of inequality despite the landmark legal victories of the Civil Rights era.
The legal scholars undertook a set of analyses and investigations that were aimed at trying to make sense of the puzzling persistence of racism in our legal system, in our political system, in our economy.
CRT has been studied in fields like sociology, economics, and political science. It's been used to examine issues such as housing and educational segregation, unconscious bias, and criminal justice reform.
Contrary to what often critics portray as sort of judging people intrinsically as being racist or not, or holding people responsible for slavery in the past. It is actually to open up the conversation of how we all inherently live in a society sort of beyond our choosing. Right? We didn't choose where we were born or what racial group we were part of, and yet we have this common history. How do we understand that history? What does it mean for us? Those are the sorts of questions that critical race theorists were trying to grapple with.
The racial reckoning spurred by the police killing of George Floyd brought the decades-old framework back into the spotlight, as some schools
Against blacks, right? I mean, it makes us think more critically, more engaged, more seriously around why do these practices happen.
The push against CRT gained steam under former President Trump, when he directed federal agencies to end any diversity trainings related to critical race theory. Though ultimately blocked on First Amendment grounds and rescinded by President Biden, the fight over CRT at the state level is still in full effect.
The focus on CRT is a way to latch onto a concept that very few people sort of really understand, which sounds kind of scary perhaps to someone not, trained in what it means. And latch onto that as a kind of football in this sort of ongoing fight over the future of this country with regard to race.
As of mid-June 2021, 21 states have introduced bills attempting to restrict the teaching of critical race theory and/or impose limits on how race is discussed inside the classroom. And those limits are often vague.
And instructors, educators, especially at the K-12 level, will just not go there. Will not run the risk of upsetting parents, or being misunderstood, or drawing the ire of lawmakers.
In Texas, for instance, House Bill 3979 says teachers must explore current events from multiple positions without giving, quote, deference to any one perspective.
There's language in this bill, like teachers need to present a balanced perspective on current events, for instance. They have to do their due diligence to present multiple viewpoints. But what happens if they're talking about an issue in the classroom and they try to present multiple viewpoints, but the student comes home and tells their parent about the lesson that day, and the parent thinks, well, they didn't do a good enough job of presenting this viewpoint. So who decides when the teacher has done an adequate job of presenting multiple perspectives on an issue? It saddens me and disappoints me that instead of really embracing this opportunity to confront our nation's past and to tell authentic and more accurate narratives about experiences of diverse people in this country, that we're looking to sweep it under the rug. We're looking to erase it even further from our memories.
Okay, so we get the idea, at least when it comes to critical race theory, and so it is important that we play that clip so that we can get a proper understanding of critical race theory. Now, there are people who strongly oppose CRT for some of the reasons lined up in that video, as you can see, Reverend Dede. The screen is frozen, Reverend Dede.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but your screen is frozen. Go ahead.
Okay, good. So yes, people oppose critical race for different reasons. But if you look at the purpose and intent of critical race issue is that intersection between law and, let's say, the U.S. law and race. So anybody who will oppose critical race issue, you are saying that those who are being affected by this issue of race should say nothing, should just be mute and quiet, and don't protest or express themselves in terms of how their rights are being downtrodden. So I think I have a difference with people who want to maybe disagree. You have your own view on that, but I think people on the other side, of people of color, should be able to express themselves to advocate for their rights as it comes to the law and the rule of law. And so if they are put down, especially the schools that will ban the issue of critical race or theory in class, is a cause of concern for me. So I don't know how you look at it, but I think that critical race issue should be given an opportunity for people to see and know their rights under the law as it relates to them as the racial issue, the skin of color, and the race issue. That's my position on that. It should be given opportunity for people to express themselves and not put them down, ban it in school because we don't want them to be heard. And that is against their own constitutional rights as well.
Exactly. But again, if we look at the theory itself, it has evolved over time since it was formulated in the late 70s by scholars with the intention of discussing America's history, racial justice, and some of the other issues that went on in the United States. However, it becomes a problem when the teaching or the content of that CRT labels every white people or all white people as racist. To me, I think that is wrong.
Yeah, fair enough. That I share that view too. I'm looking at Revelation 7. We all are part of this big nation of group of people that God created. So that is one aspect of it. But that is an excuse because why there are people who deal with the issue of critical race issue that don't really categorize white people as racist. There are some good white people. I have white friends who are not racist. So if you are teaching it in a broad sense of understanding, giving perspective to people of color, that is necessary because people of color should know where they belong and their rights under the law. So if you say they should not be taught critical race issue, then are you telling me and viewers who agree with that? Are you saying to us that they should not advocate for the rights in society if the rights are being abused and downtrodden? That is my question I want you to really reflect on.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that talking about history is there's nothing wrong with talking about history, your past history, whether it is ugly, bitter, or however it looks, but it depends on how it is being taught. I believe that from what I've been seeing and watching, most of these Americans, particularly the white race, they are saying that children have been taught a whole lot about racism that somehow bend toward the white race. In other words, they are teaching hatred. Say, hey, this is what the white people did. They talk about history of slavery and other things that are happening in the American society. And so they are saying that critical race theory brings about socialism, it brings about hatred and division more. But then again, should we not talk about history, whether the history is ugly or whether it is bad? Should we not talk about it, or it shouldn't be talked about? And for me, yes, history can be talked about, but if it is taught in the classroom in a way that will make one race to look bad, I believe it needs to be re-examined, or that content needs to be re-examined.
True, true. To what extent is one race made to be bad? What did the race do? Uh, Taking into consideration the James Crow laws, you know the laws as well as I do. What happened then? So are we saying people should be mute? That's what I don't understand. Should be mute about historicity? Now, if I listen to a professor, and I will give you the story that happened in 1980 with a professor for Harvard University, Harvard Law
Mhm.
School, the Harvard Law School, who developed a curriculum to encompass critical race issues so that people can understand and grasp the content and the content of the issue to be well
Mhm.
informed so as to use that information for the well-being society. Now, this professor was technically driven out of the school because why? His view of creating a curriculum was not supported by some member of the faculty. So students of color decided that they were going to protest to make sure that this professor, what the curriculum he prepared should be taught by a professor of color. And the professor said no. Now, so my question is, and the reason they gave us that there was no black qualified professor to teach that course that Professor, what's his name, Professor, let me find his name, Professor Bell created at Harvard Law School in the 80s. Now, my question is, are you saying there is not a black qualified professor that will teach critical race theory based on the curriculum that Professor Bear created? Those are the kind of issues that I'm trying to still grip up with. Now, in terms of what you stated, if the teaching is just bent on demonizing one aspect of the race, that the white race, you call it supremacy, that's a different thing. But if the curriculum is balanced, I think it should be given a hearing in schools and other places.
Yeah, so then the issue is about balance, but then how would it be balanced? And that is where a lot of parents are grappling with, and that is why they are protesting, because the content that is being taught before it came to the attention of the parents was all about racism is bad all over. It's systemic. It's in the system. It's part of the law. It is rooted in the law, or it was made based on the law. And so people of color are being discriminated against for their rights in society. They lack the opportunity economically and other means within society, and that is where the back and forth is coming from, and it has even crept into the church. The Southern Baptist Convention, they had a clause in their constitution about race, you know, embracing diversity, because there were a lot of black pastors and churches that were threatening to pull out because the convention had not been doing any kind of a good job regarding integration of race, people from other ethnic groups, or let's say the black community or people of color. And so that tension was there, and there was a resolution passed called, I believe there's a term for it, and we'll play the video for that with one of the leaders of the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention. And our clause, tend to balance the idea or concept about embracing diversity within the convention. However, all of the past presidents, including the leadership as a whole, gave a U-turn. They signed on again, declaring that critical race theory is no good for, or it is unbiblical for the SBC to embrace, and so they outlaw critical race theory. Now, there are some people within the black community or the black church or black churches are not happy about it at all, and this is a tension. But again, the focus should be on the term that is being used, critical race theory. What is critical so much about race that it must involve other justice issues like racial justice, social justice, and all other, how would I say, rights for certain groups in the society. And the church as a whole is afraid for the fact that critical race theory is an ideology based on secular reasoning. And that is how they look at it. So we will take a look here at a Christian author who has written a book on this whole subject matter. He's an African American. His name is Vody Buckman. I believe we featured him 2 weeks ago on our program, and he is looking at the history, okay, that made people to formulate that particular theory and how we ought to be mindful. The church has to be very mindful when they see a term or a label, because on that label, the surface is there. As you say, yeah, justice, justice, and everybody go for it. But the root or the underneath that particular label, there are ideologies that do not pair well with the Christian faith or biblical principles. So let us bring him on here, and let's see here. I'll bring him on, and so he can provide some sort of lesson for us to take a look critically at critical race theory. And I believe it's going to be very, very important for us to listen to what he has to say, because it involves our faith, and we have to be mindful how we embrace the whole idea about race or justice, which can be labeled in many ways. And in doing so, if we're not careful, or if we're not mindful as a church or Christians, we will fall prey to the enemy's entrapment of that particular term. So let me bring it on here, and let him give us some education here. That is Vody Buckham. Let's bring it on here. Okay, bring him on the screen. And he is saying something very, 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 very interesting here, that we are to listen and find some sort of a understanding of why we need to be very, very mindful. So let's go.
The 1619 Project is all about. Listen, if America is founded in 1776, then we're founded on the principles of the Declaration of Independence, right? Or let's say, you want to just be technical about it. And you say, okay, I get that, but really technically, we're founded in 1787. Because that's, Constitution, ratification, right? 1787. Cool, fine. Now it's the Constitution. So either 1776, Declaration of Independence, or 1787, Declaration of Independence, Constitution. Either way, right? Either way, we've got some documents that say to us, this is what America is. 1619 Project says, no. America's established 1619. Why? It is everywhere all the time. Everything is racist. Secondly, convergence theory or interest convergence theory. This is the second major tenet of critical race theory. Again, according to seminal works on critical race theory. By the way, in the academic literature, if people write journals and peer-reviewed journals, and if you're an academic, you want to publish peer-reviewed journals, right? That's how you get your academic bona fides. You publish in peer-reviewed journals. And if you publish in a peer-reviewed journal and you get, say, a couple of hundred citations of your work, you pat yourself on the back. You're getting it done, right? You got hundreds of citations, hundreds of other scholars who are referring to your work. You're getting it done. The stuff that I'm citing has thousands of citations. Thousands. Some of them upwards of 5,000, 6,000 citations. So these are not obscure people out there in the corners, of academia. No, these are the rock stars. And these are the agreed-upon pillars of critical race theory. So number one, racism is normal. Number two, convergence theory. Again, I'll read from seminal work on critical race theory, Delgado's book, Critical Race Theory. Racism advances the interests of both white elites, materially, and working class whites, psychically. Large segments of society have little incentive to eradicate it. This means whites are incapable of righteous actions on race, and only undo racism when it benefits them, when their interests converge with the interests of people of color. And yes, he used the word righteous. White people are incapable of righteous actions on race. Everything is racist. Well, this thing wasn't racist, then that must mean that the white person benefited from it, because that's the only time that white people will do anything other than be racist. So according to critical race theory, white people are not only racist, but incurably so. Ineradicably so. Can't be anything else. An entire swath of people condemned. By their melanin count. Again, not me. This is critical race theory. Third principle is anti-liberalism. Now, when I say anti-liberalism, it doesn't mean conservatism, right? Anti-liberalism in terms of the academic use of the word, right? Like the liberal arts. Anti-liberalism. CRT questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. Anti-liberalism, which is rooted in the fourth one, which is the idea that knowledge is socially constructed. Knowledge is socially constructed. There is no objective knowledge, no objective truth. You see, in a culture, the hegemony is just a hegemony. We do not determine whether or not the hegemony is objectively true. We can't determine that because these people have constructed whatever the hegemony is. And it exists because it's been constructed by the oppressor for the purpose of oppression. And we certainly don't operate within its confines. So, Delgado writes, storytelling, narrative reading is the way black people hold knowledge versus the science and reason method of white people. Science and reasoning is white. The scientific method is white. There was a big stir last year when this flyer came out from the Smithsonian's Museum of African American History. And this was kind of an explanation of an expose of whiteness, and there were certain things on it like here is this is whiteness, like scientific method, emphasis on being on time, emphasis on self-reliance, these sorts of things. The basic understanding of the nuclear family, which is why Black Lives Matter. Mission of hegemony. If you want to break this, you've got to break up families so that children are not raised in these institutions that pass on tradition so effectively. So minority status, in other words, brings with it a presumed competence to speak about race and racism. The legal storytelling movement urges black and brown writers to recount their experiences with racism and the legal system and to apply their own unique perspectives to assess law's master narratives. I coined the phrase ethnic Gnosticism to sort of explain what we're dealing with here. Terry also refers to it as the centrality of experiential knowledge, and says that CRT recognizes that the experiential knowledge of people of color is...
Okay. So we got a lot from Vadi over there. So he is giving the history, how that whole concept began, and looking at the premise of this whole critical race theory. He talks about the 1619 project. That is when the black slaves were brought on the shores of America. And he is saying that that particular project, 1690, defines America from that period of its foundation or formation. And so the whole idea from defining America from 1619 project makes the whole idea okay that America is all about racism. And so he said that is the premise that came through that CRT is laid upon. But if America is defined by its original Declaration of Independence with Constitution in the 1700s, then the whole issue of racism and other things that define CRT, it is not okay with those who believe that America was defined by the day or the year when black slaves came to America. So there's a whole debate here, and he goes on to say a whole lot about the convergence theory, where they look at the white race to be incapable of righteous action on racism, which means they are incurable. They cannot cure or do anything about racism to create an equal society. And therefore, within that particular theory, there is nothing like objective truth. And when there's no objective truth in critical race theory, that is the foundation, then it goes against the principle of the Bible, which of course we believe in objective truth, absolute truth. And so it's just a matter of we have to be mindful of the term used here as Christians. What's your take?
I don't go with everything he said because the critical race theory is based on the issue of rights, the issue of freedom, the issue of justice, the issue of social justice. You can leave the whole nine yards. So if it is just limited to what he stated, then we leave in a whole lot. Let me go to a story that I read. I put it up the other day, and I think it's necessary that I read it so that people
Mhm.
who don't know about this will begin to see that this critical race theory has its foundation in people wanting to make sure that they are heard. Now, you mentioned the Southern Baptist Convention. I'll pull up a story that was published in the call it the intelligence, and this is June 16, 2021. I'll read it verbatim so that I don't want to add a word to it. And it is titled How Critical Race Theory Overran the Southern Baptist Convention. And the story begins. As they headed towards Nashville for the Southern Baptist Convention's annual meeting, the cars were black, the cars with black parrot flags stripped to their windows, complete with smacking skulls and crossbones, were a good indicator that some of the passengers were spoiling for a fight. The story continues. These Protestant smackbucklers were followers of a coalition called the Conservative Baptist Network, whose leaders have warned of a leftward draft in a denomination, listen to this, in a denomination known for its deep-rooted conservatism on issues both political and theological. The story continues. Before the meeting, held this week at the Music City Center in downtown Nashville, CBN, which is the Conservative Baptist Network, supporters filed fill their social media profiles with Jolly Rogers emojis and memes, comparing themselves to gang of marauding buccaneers. Gangs of marauding buccaneers. Their rallying cry heading into the gathering made their intentions clear. Take the ship. Now, if we are looking at the issue of critical race theory, and we see this kind of situation going on, but then on the flip side, if anybody of color does this, it will be cried down. Why? Because they will be allegedly propagating or perpetrating issues of conflict and race at a church convention. So the point I'm making here is, while it is true that some people may push the issue of critical race to an extent that will muddy the water and downgrade the essence of what critical race is actually intended to address, there are those who are fervently and sincerely as well, who want to make sure that the issue of race, you ask the question, what's critical race? Critical race because this issue pertains to a group of people who feel that their rights have been violated, who feels that they are not heard to a certain extent, want to be heard. So the way to do that is to train their offsprings, their young people, to know that this issue exists, not in a sense where you pity other people bad, but the issue exists and it should be addressed. That is the context of the critical race issue. So if anybody tells me it's against the Bible, then let's go to the scripture. Because the scripture says we all are made in the image and likeness of God and made equal. So if one group feel that they are supreme and above the other group, then it's a biblical issue as well as a constitutional issue and legal issue. So that's my take on that. The professor made some serious points, but the overarching argument he's making tends to tell me that if you fight for your right or stand for your right, it means you are promoting racism. It's not always the case. If you stood for your right and make sure you advocate what is happening in the society, that's fair enough. That's the amendment or the First Amendment. You have the right to speak up. But if we tie everything to racism to an extent where we water down the people's right to speak up, that is the issue, Alex. And that's my take on that.
Yes, yes, but this is being very mindful about not just the justice involved. We all believe in justice, the best, because the Bible speaks about justice, and we also believe that we should make the effort to correct where injustice is. because it's a biblical, definition of our way of understanding justice and injustice. Now, when there's an issue of equity or equality, which means we're going to see something, the outcome to be better for everybody. And when there's an issue of equality, where all people should be treated fairly, despite their skin color, we see that as an issue of justice. But again, being mindful about the term when it comes to social justice, like Backham gave an illustration in one of the videos that we played a few weeks ago. He says this is like a train going, okay, and the engine of that train is critical race theory, okay, and then social justice there on our train, and in our train with social justice behind us there are cardboards, okay, and you have other things, like women's rights, same-sex marriage, and the list goes on. And so if we look at the theory, or if we look at the term as a whole, critical racial theory, we must dig beyond, let's say below, or the root. When we look at the root, we should look at the root of the term to know why this whole idea is developing. We should not just be carried away by the term and say, oh yeah, it has to do with the rights of people alone, because there are people who formulated the idea in order to promote their interest. And this is where, for me, I stand that we should be very mindful about the label, because it could mean different things to many people, and people can jump on to bring in their own ideologies that are very, very dangerous, not just to the Christian faith, but to a community of people. I believe in equity. I believe in equality. I believe in the rights of other people. But again, my defense of people's rights should be with the limitation of my biblical principles and values, or my conviction of the gospel. And so we're bringing a conversation here with this candidate for the presidency of the Southern Baptist Convention, as we see, even though he didn't win the presidency. But he made a very good point here regarding how we ought to be very mindful when we hear a term. Okay, for example, liberalism. Okay, so if you were to ask me, do you believe in liberalism? The first thing I'm going to ask you, what do you mean? How do you define it? In what context? We have to be very mindful, because there are forces out there that might develop some sort of term, or the term will be inclusive. However, underneath the surface, there are many motives going on. There are motives going on. There are many other things going on that we have to be mindful, because if we get on our train, it might be too late for us to get off. And so I'm going to bring this conversation on right now with this SBC former candidate for president. And he made a very good point. I believe that we all can listen to and kind of let it turn around in our minds to make sure that what we are talking about here makes sense, because critical race theory is rattling the United States in the schools, in politics, and in the church. And we ought to pay close attention to that as we look at the term critical race theory. So let me bring this elder on here, and he will share his thoughts about labels, how we ought to be very, very mindful about labels. Okay, let's bring him on. Okay, okay, there you go. Okay, let's bring him on.
Well, I have taught my congregation here. I'm about to celebrate my 25th anniversary on staff here, most of that as the senior pastor. And I regularly teach them that anytime you have a cultural or theological war that's going on, a battle that's going on, The first battle in that long-term war is a battle for the dictionary. It's a battle for the definition of terms. So let me address this generally, and I want to come back specifically to your question.
Okay.
Generally, what happens in those first rounds of the redefinition of terms is it allows people to waffle. It allows them to embrace compromise even if they don't realize that they have.
Right.
Because when you've relabeled, retitled, and re-identified everything, redefined it, you can embrace a label while denying or not holding to all of the tenets of belief that that label used to represent.
Right.
Simultaneously, you can embrace all the tenets of a certain belief system while denying the label. This is how, for example, you can have a leader in the Southern Baptist Convention declare that a white brother say, "I am a racist, and I'll be a racist, struggle with white supremacy till I die and receive my glorified body." But go on record that he rejects critical race theory and intersectionality. It's because of a redefinition of terms. I think that's subtle. It doesn't have to be intentional or even conscious, but it's real just the same.
Right.
So in the very same way, you have words like conservative, moderate, liberal. Those are as relative a terms as contemporary versus traditional music in our churches.
Right.
I was asked recently, are you a fundamentalist? I said, well, I can't answer that question because I don't know how you define that term.
Right.
So the definition of terms is very, very important, is the general response to that question. But I was asked in an interview, basically, do you think that there is liberalism in the Southern Baptist Convention? Is there a leftward drift? Not if you define liberalism just in terms of orthodoxy or the fundamentals of the faith.
Right.
I do not personally know of any leader or pastor currently involved in the Southern Baptist Convention that would deny the virgin birth, the substitutionary atonement of Christ. There are arguments about the extent of it and subtle nuances of that, but I don't know a leader in the Southern Baptist Convention that would deny the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ, the inerrancy of the Word of God. And we should be thankful for that, but at the same time, liberalism or moves to the left can happen in more subtle and I think more scheming ways. For example, when you have the leader of one of our entities who says, I wouldn't go to a homosexual wedding, but I would go to the reception or the shower. That is some type of celebration before or after the actual so-called nuptials.
Right.
That is celebrating that which God calls an abomination. That is a departure from where Southern Baptists have stood, at least for the last 30, 35 years since the conservative resurgence. I don't think that's a shift or a drift to the right. I think it's a shift to the left. And when you have leaders who allow these things to be perpetuated and taught, I definitely think that there is a drifting away from a practice of relying on the sufficiency and the authority of God's Word.
Mike, when I think back many years ago, when I left Catholicism, I came into the Southern Baptist Convention, and it seemed like if you were to use describe the Southern Baptist Convention to anyone that was not in it, they would say, oh, those are the guys that are going to try to make sure that they get you converted, that they want to make sure that they get you born again. So they're going to evangelize you, proselytize you. It seems like that's kind of become something that's not been always at the forefront with the Southern Baptist Convention. It seems like the internal squabbles and the squabbles over social justice, and as well even a leftward political bent in terms of trying to make sure that we redefine those folks within, I would say, what is about 14 million members of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Officially.
Yeah, officially. So we look at that, we're looking at an entity that's the size of a small country, or a medium-sized country, I should say. And it seems as if there is an intent to introduce something that is disguised to some extent as a theological move, but is really a political move. And that has become the big talked about
within Sunday school, within your Sunday morning services, within Wednesday nights, within our programs for our children, within parachurch ministries that are associated with the Southern Baptist Convention, as opposed to, again, what I remember, which was evangelism, saving souls. And I met my wife, who's Chinese, and I'm a half Cuban guy, in the Southern Baptist Church. And I remember it being multi-ethnic, and that was never a thing. It's just that we all had a unity and purpose. Do you see that, Mike, as something that is starting to become lost? And then how do we get that back?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would cite just by way of a quick anecdote. When we went to Birmingham in 2019, we had a wonderful theme for that year's annual meeting, Gospel Above All. But I don't think there were very many people who left Birmingham or Southern Baptists who were maybe not able to be in Birmingham who were watching it through social media and traditional media, hearing reports of a lot of the things that happened in Birmingham. I do not think that the message coming out of that annual meeting was the gospel above all, because we're so sidetracked and focused on a lot of different things. Our church here at Emmanuel, we've seen God's blessings through just faithful evangelism. We don't believe in pragmatism and slick gimmicks, man-centered presentations. But here in a very small town, we have a hot heart to see lost people come to faith in Christ. In the 25 years that I've been here, we've averaged around 63 baptisms a year, which that's about the only statistic that we have to give our best idea to measure the evangelistic fruitfulness of a church. I remember going to knock on doors. Especially pre-COVID, we would go out and old-fashioned door knocking and visitation. And knocked on the door of a Presbyterian brother who I would later in that encounter, I'd never met him before, but would subsequently find him to be a devout brother in Christ who was attending a Presbyterian church here. And we later joked about the fact that if we would enlarge our baptistry, or if they would enlarge their baptistry, he said I could go preach there sometime, or if we would shrink ours, so he would come and be a member here. Sure. Just good-natured
conversation between the two of us. But when I first met him,
okay, so we get the idea of Mike here, what he's talking about, labels. We have to be very, very mindful about labels, because that label can come with a lot of things that we don't know. So it is always good, according to Vodi and Mike, to understand the deeper meaning of what that label is or that term is. And so it becomes very confusing for fellow Christians, Reverend Dede.
Yeah, why it is true, I'm concerned about labels. That does not disabuse us of the fact that people will always bring labels into things the way they see it. But for instance, for those who are Liberians, I know we're speaking to a lot of people across culture. There was a church called the Never Die Church. Now, their mode of Christianity was far opposed to Jesus' teaching. So does that mean that Jesus' teaching was not real? Or does that mean that because he had an interpretation of that John text that said, yet even though you die, yet you shall live? That was for eternal life. But Slebo and his people took that text upside down. So what I'm saying in this context is this: critical race theory, it has its own downside, and as other people will see it, but it's constructed to the extent where people are advocating for what they think their rights are being abused at. So if that is the essence of the critical race theory, then why other people impute other things into it? That's fair enough. People see different interpretations at different times, but we should not see it, that critical race issue or theory issue, we should not see it as bent or bringing up issues that are meant to categorize one sector of the society as racism, as racist, and the other as good. Because people have the right, Alex, and they must advocate those rights. If they have to advocate those rights based on their advocacy of things they think they should talk about, that's fine. Now, Mark we talk about labels and definition. People always get different definition to things. He mentioned a lot of things, but I just decided to look at motives, labels, and definitions. There will always be people bringing different definitions to issues, but I just not take the essence of the main topic we're discussing about rights. Remember, critical race theory has an intersection between rights and the law. Now, those who are advocates of critical race theory believe that the law has systematic issue that suppress a particular race. This is the bedrock of the whole issue of critical race. So once we understand that, any absence or any presence of the labels will be clear eye to know that people will have different interpretations, but the main crux of the matter is where the civil rights and the law means.
Yes, and the whole label about CRT, where people believe that is that all white people are racist and our racism is systemic. I have a very serious problem of really accepting that wholeheartedly because I believe that all white people are now racist. One and
Agree.
two, I believe that 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 categorizing just one set of people and label them can bring division as a whole. But can we get or gather certain aspects that are positive about critical race theory, like the history of the United States? Of course, people need to talk about the history of the United States, but it should be talked about in a way where it balance all objective analysis of the history can be given. Now, some of you will ask, some of you will say, well, there will be nothing that is so objective in talking about American history because people are rejecting CRT as a whole. And so this is where the ups and downs, come in or play it out because there's no way where can we find the balance where yes, race can be talked about, but then it depends on how it is talked about.
So the question
Talking
is, Alice, the question is, who's rejecting it? Who are those rejecting it?
those
Look
who
what
are rejecting it, they believe that the premise upon which the critical race theory is formulated, it is wrong. That is, that America is a racist country, and then two, that because America is racist and the system and laws that are in place are systemic, that it is rooted in racism. That, of course, is a concept that I reject in a sense because it is not totally true.
yeah, but
That's
the
my
question
take.
I asked was, who is rejecting it? Who is
What,
rejecting it?
those are parents who send their children to school, as we saw in the clip here. They were protesting. Their parents, there are other scholars, and even the church. In the church, mostly the Baptist Southern Convention, they reject that whole CRT from their constitution. I mean, the last convention, they declare that it will be outlaw
Yeah.
because
So,
it's like looking at one race and blaming one race. That's how they
yeah.
look at it. And then under that, there are other groups that are advocating to bringing social justice issues that are unbiblical and some other things that are unbiblical.
Yeah. What again, why it is true that people will bring and introduce their own view and their own interpretation on the critical race issue, that does not take for the critical race issue the fact that something is amiss that the critical race issue wants to address. So addressing it, people always pushed into to a level that will go beyond what the intended purpose is. But when I hear people regularly reject critical race theory, then I ask myself, so are you seeing the critical race theory has no message? It has no purpose. It has no meaning. Is that why you just rejecting it outrightly, or you want to be specific on the issues that you have issue with? Then I'll listen to that. But to just say it's totally categorically wrong, I don't stay with that. And I totally disagree with that myself.
Okay, well, that's how we end our program for today. Thank you so much for watching this program. It's a platform that we discuss issues that affect or confront the Christian life of faith. And of course, today is about critical race theory. I know some of you have heard about this theory, but it is a theory or concept that has brought division among Americans and even the church, particularly in the church and in politics. Um, Give us your view and let us know what you think, and we would appreciate all of your comments. I know some people being a guy commented on YouTube and wrote a whole long history about not history, yeah, history and some other analysis on our channel, stating that yes, CRT is totally wrong. And so, but anyway, that's the opinion that we expect from people who see it that way and the way they define the term. Thank you so much. Well, let's say thank you. We'll be back here next Saturday. My name is Alexander Red, your host, and of course, Reverend Suarez Dede, co-host here. And we'll be back next Saturday, next weekend. Thank you so much for joining. Have a blessed day.
Be blessed.